everybody. Today we're going to talk about canvas stretching and doing it yourself rather than buying the store-bought. So first thing is I want to have all the tools that I'm going to need ready, and I'm talking about stretching the canvas to applying a layer of gesso. So canvas pliers are something that you need when you're working on larger canvases. I find that as long as I have enough extra grip to pull it tight, these are not always necessary, but these are very handy when you really need to grab a hold and tighten. So not everybody has these. If you don't, you can still stretch canvas without them. But they are convenient to have around. The thing that you will need is a staple gun, and this one is the smaller version of the kind of industrial level staple guns. I think for most people it's a little bit easier to squeeze and apply the staple. If you get the T50s, which these are some staples for the T50, and it's a heavier duty one, goes in the larger gun. Those, if you have small hands especially, is very hard to staple with one hand. And you're gonna see when I do the process, when I show you the process, that you're gonna wanna be able to hold, if you're doing it by yourself, unless you have some friendly assistance, you wanna hold the canvas and be able to staple with one hand. So the smaller staple gun is better for most people, unless you have super strong hands and you don't care. And make sure you have the correct staples. This is the JT21s, they're a smaller staple. I'm only doing a small canvas. Actually, I use these even on my very larger, much larger canvases. Scissors or a knife for starting the cut of the canvas, and then the gesso, and a cheap or utility gesso brush. This is actually a nice oil painting brush, but due to some abuses and years, it is losing hairs and it's starting to fall apart, so I'm going to use it anyway for gessoing. I like the fact that it has a stiff bristle, which I will show you how that comes in handy when we actually do the apply of the gesso. So let's get started. You also have your canvas, and the canvas that I ask you guys to get is an 8-ounce or a 12-ounce, sorry, 10 or 12-ounce canvas, and that's referring to the thickness. I believe this is a 12-ounce, and you can feel the difference. You do want 100% cotton ducked canvas, and the reason is that that is what's going to, the raw canvas, when you apply the gesso, will size and shrink, so it will give you a nice taut surface. I've had students that bring in various kinds of fabric materials, and it's true, you can paint on whatever you want, but the caveat is it's not always the nicest surface, or it doesn't react the way that you think it might. So synthetic fabrics like polyesters will not shrink like this does, and will not absorb the primer the way that this does. So cotton, what I want you guys to have is cotton ducked 12 or 10-ounce canvas. You have a yard, that's what's on the supply list, and as a minimum, and so you don't need this whole thing. It depends on what size your stretcher bars are, and I don't have any of the store-bought stretcher bars with me, so I'm just going to use this little cheap frame thing to show you. The stretcher bars that you get at the store pre-made will fit together. They're sort of tongue and groove joints, and they will just slip in together. You don't need to glue them, you don't need to nail them or anything. You just fit the frame together, and then stretching the canvas over it gives it the strength it needs not to fall apart. It's going to be held together by the tension of the canvas. You want to lay your stretcher bars after you've put them together, lay them on the canvas to see how much you'll need. Sometimes you get really the gallery size stretcher bars, and they're a lot fatter. So you want to make sure you have enough that you can grab it and pull it completely over the back side and staple it to the back of the canvas. So leave yourself a good, on a normal size stretcher bar, maybe a good 2.5 to 3 inches all the way around. You'll get a feel for what you prefer as you do a lot of these. So canvas, you can cut all the way around, or you can cut and tear. I usually, especially for large things, I just cut a small, let me make sure I'm in the camera lens here. Oh, and this is actually not what I'm going to be stretching on. I've got a much larger, because I actually want to use this anyway. Now this is a canvas cradle, is what I was taught that they were called. A lot of people paint on these directly. I made this one, and it doesn't have perfect edges, but if you get a really nice wood and cover the frame perfectly like this, you could gesso this surface and paint on that, gesso on the wood, and just paint directly on the wood. Or you could, if you want the wood look, you can do a clear primer sealer and paint on that too, at least with acrylic. Anyway, so I'm going to stretch canvas over this, because if I ever decide that I don't want that, or I start this piece and I don't like it, I can unstretch it and reuse this frame. I was saving this to paint directly on the wood, but now I'm just going to stretch canvas over it. So this would be the same thing as your stretcher bars. You notice now that I need a little bit more on the edges to get over that top and staple to the back side. So I'm going to leave myself about 3 inches, and then I'm going to cut, and I don't know if you can see in the camera, but what I did is I just cut, I'll move this over, a small slit, and then the canvas will tear in a straight line, so it'll just go down the weave of the fabric. So you can just rip it back. Now I don't want to go all the way, because sure I need to. So I'm just going to rip to there. This is a perfectly square canvas, so we'll fit it. And then to go the other direction, I'm going to do the same thing and just cut a little bit of a slit, and then this one I'm going to rip all the way out. Gratifying sound. Okay, I'm gonna stand up here. Okay, so now I have the canvas cut to the shape of the, and normally I would want to work on a bigger table that wasn't wobbly like this, or on the floor. I prefer working on the floor if that's the case, but for the video, we just make do with what we can do. When you shred it, you get all these extra little strings, so you're going to pull all those off, but and then they get caught in the wheels of your chair. Okay, so I position it evenly around, so all the edges are about the same. I have room to pull the canvas tight on all sides, and then you begin to staple. So make sure your staple gun has plenty of staples. If you have a large gun and you need both hands to do it, have a friend hold this for you. The first staple, you don't have to pull tight because you're not pulling against the other side. There's no tension yet. So I just fold it over nicely and do, in the middle of one side, I'll do maybe three staples. And then I move to the opposite side and I do pull tension. And then I pull 3 staples. And I'm pulling as tight as I can, but not really worried about it too much because the gesso will tighten up. But the tighter you get it, especially if you're not working on a wood back like this, the better it is, because you want a lot of tension so you don't have wobble when you're trying to paint. Okay, so pulling tight, staple. Now, I don't go all the way to the corners yet. I want to make sure and stretch from the middle of the opposite side. So you always work from the middle and work towards the outer edges. So pulling tight, a little bit tight here because there is some resistance, but not too tight. Don't want to throw it out of whack. And then the other side is when I actually start to pull really tight. And if I wanted to, if I was really trying to get this and it didn't have a wood backing, this is where I might use the pliers to get a grip and to really pull that canvas. But I'm not worried about that. Just get it nice and tight. Okay, now I'm just gonna I'm gonna keep doing this till I get to the outer corner, and then I'm gonna show you the fold. Okay, so just keep working around and working out towards the outer edges. I also like to, usually I'm a little bit more careful, not that it matters too much, but I keep the staples in alignment. I always go to diagonal. I think it gives more strength to the staple so it doesn't pull out. Okay, I'm getting close to the corners now, so I don't want to go too far because that will give me less room to make a fold. Make sure that the camera can actually see this. I think this is a good line here. So if this were not a square and it were longer than it was wide, I might choose, if I'm going to be working in a portrait format or a landscape format, which direction I want to make the fold. But it's a square, so it's going to be the same anyway. The reason being is because when you come up to the edge of the canvas, it's nice to have the wrap around on the side and not to see the seam of the fold on the side of the canvas, because sometimes you don't want to frame the canvas and you just want it to be nice and clean. So if this were the side that you would see on the vertical edge of the wall as you're walking by, you would see this side of the canvas. Then I would want to fold it so that there's a little lump, but there's no seam. I'm not going to go this direction to where you see a big edge or seam here. Okay, so, and the way that I do this is you got to kind of get a feel for it, but if you've wrapped Christmas presents, then you might already know, but I push in with my finger and get a nice little like napkin fold. It's like a little 45, and then fold up, and you can kind of pull it out and adjust it until the line is going straight up the edge there. And once you get that nice fold, pull it tight and then staple on top. So I'm gonna do that. First of all, now that I know my fold is here, on this side, because I know the direction now, I'm gonna get a little bit closer. And then I'm gonna fold this side. I have extra room. And tuck that in deep. And just one more time. So basically you have this weird corner, right? So this is gonna go to the inside, this outer corner to the inside, and create a nice diagonal fold here that can then come over this way. And you gotta kind of fiddle with it a little bit until that seam goes right up the edge, the outer edge of the canvas, okay? So then I get that and pull it really nice and tight and staple it. Get this one extra tight. And then I like to staple this down so I get a nice clean edge. It's not gonna come, no flaps coming up, okay? Now I wanna be sure that I keep track, and I'm gonna get that fold coming on both sides and on the other side. So I'm not gonna lose track and just randomly fold and get the seam in the wrong place. So same thing, if you can see, folding in, pulling tight, and staple. Okay, nice and neat, button it up. then same thing on this side. Let me get in a little closer because I know which direction I'm going to do the fold so I can staple this side in. And then I push in my seam, get it nice and aligned to that corner. Can you see that? And no fold here, no seam there. And then pull this tight, staple. Store-bought canvases are fairly inexpensive, so you know it's not a big deal to buy those. But the longer you paint, you might try. I mean, it's really good to try this because I find that I don't like store-bought canvases after building my own. I never ever buy them. Some of my friends that are professional painters still do buy them, so that it's not like there's anything wrong with it. But you end up finding your own way and the things that you like to do. When I do this, sometimes along this edge, I will also just do a couple staples to get that to fold down. Some people will cut this so they get nice, just the right amount. I like to leave a little extra and just kind of tuck it in so that it doesn't get in my way. So you'll find your own way. Now you see that it's already nice and tight, and this is a little unfair because there's a board backing this, so it's already going to be nice and firm, which is one of the reasons I build them like this, because I don't like the play of the canvas so much. Some people really do. I do not like it. I like to draw on there and have it be a nice solid surface. So at this point, you're going to apply the gesso. So you're going to want to have your gesso, your brush, and probably a little bit of water. That's one, and something to set your brush in when you're done. Even if it's a bad brush, if the gesso dries in it, then it is ruined. Not so worried about this brush. And I'm almost out of this. This is just acrylic gesso. And I do have a little water off camera. So I'm just gonna wet my brush a little bit so that it's not perfectly dry. And then just get some of that gesso on there. Now this is the point where you really wanna I like having a shorter, stiff brush. Sometimes if they're long and thin and they just kind of bend and waft over the surface, is not as good, because you really want those bristles to work the gesso into the fabric of the canvas to get a thorough coverage. So this first one, I'm really aggressive with sort of getting it on there. So I'm painting it on, but I don't want to have holes or gaps. I want to get really even coverage and work that primer into the canvas. So I can even do this kind of thing and then smooth out after, okay? You always start in the middle, work towards the corners, kind of like when you're stapling from the center towards the corners. Is the way that I was always taught, and it makes sense because if you're doing a large canvas, this will start to dry even on a hot day, even before you're done priming it, and so you want it to shrink evenly and not pull unevenly on your stretcher bars. More important for larger canvases. So my main thing on the first one, and the first layer of gesso, your canvas will eat up a lot of it because it's all hungry and thirsty. I guess thirsty more than hungry. And it's just soaking up the gesso. So inside to out, work your way into the corners. And personally, I like to gesso the sides. It's not necessary, but it does give you a nice clean edge. And also some people like to paint around the side of the canvas. I don't really care to do that either, but or you can eventually paint it black. Look at that, nice marshmallowy. Just get some on here. I'm just gonna do the front for now because this video is gonna get long, and the longer it gets, the longer it takes to upload to YouTube. Maybe I'll speed some of this up. So I don't know if you can see, but you see little bits of canvas poking through right here, and you don't want that. Make sure you really work that in. And like I said, this brush is old, so I'm getting hairs. It's like, it's having problems. Probably it wasn't a good idea to use this brush. Oops. Any house painting brush will work. It just so happens that all of mine are at school, and I left them when we went into quarantine. So I'm just using a really old oil painting brush that is way past its prime. So here at the end, after I've really worked it into the surface, now I'm feathering it out. So I'm doing light amount of pressure and just letting the brush feather across to knock down those brush marks. You want it flat and smooth. And hopefully, oh my goodness, without all these hairs. This is kind of a disaster, but I'm just gonna give it a sand job in between, so maybe some of that will come off in the sanding, hopefully. Because there's just way too many to pick out. If it's one or two, you can kind of pick it out and then just keep going. But I've got like just dozens of these things all over the place. So feathering, and then it's like what was that the movie Karate Kid, where it's like wax on, wax on. You want just nice, long, smooth strokes to get it a really even, consistent surface. And that's it. This will dry in really fast, but it varies depending on the weather. There you can see hairs coming out. They're all over the place. So this is what not to use. I might just throw this brush away. But I would let this dry after I painted the sides, and probably after I stop the camera, I will paint the sides with gesso and maybe switch brushes. But I would let this dry, and then I'm gonna give it a light sanding with a fine grit sandpaper, like a 220. And then I will apply a second layer of gesso, and then I will sand again. And if I really, really want a fine surface, I'll apply a third layer of gesso and then do a final sanding, and then I've got this nice, smooth, pristine surface to start a painting on. If I'm doing a detailed rendering that I want to have that really smooth application of paint, I would really recommend doing 3 layers of gesso on to the raw canvas and sanding in between layers. Okay, so I hope I didn't forget anything.